Okay, this is the Daf Yomi for Daf 34 of Shevuot, Oaths. This is going to go up right before Shabbat, but please don't watch this on Shabbat. Watch this before or after, but not on Shabbat. And one of the things that the holiday that we just came through, Shavuot, impressed is killing yourself, making time for Torah. I'm sorry, because we stay up all night but killing yourself over making time for Torah, like sacrificing yourself. It's a noble thing to have that distinct schedule where you always make time to study. No matter what happens, you always make time to study. That is a very praiseworthy trait to have as a Jew, is to just, no matter what happens in life, that you're always going to make time for study. And so sometimes a lot of things get away from us, and just because a video doesn't go up doesn't mean that there's nothing going on. But there's always something to study. You should always have a book with you. Take little books, get little books. Get little books, little books, publications, or whatever you can take with you, and take it with you all the time. Honestly, your Siddur should go with you everywhere you go. That's the prayers of the nations. Take it with you. Take it with you everywhere you go. Have it in your car. Have something in your car, so whenever, nothing's going on, you're waiting for something, waiting at a, accident, and you're dead stop on the road, you've got something to learn. But anyway, here we go. Oaths, Daf 34. At the end of 33, it says, and furthermore, one can infer this halakha by means of an a fortiori inference from the halakha of a deposit. If in the case of a deposit with regard to which the Torah rendered the halakhic status of women like that of men, the halakhic status of relatives like that of non-relatives, and the halakhic status of unfit witnesses like those fit to testify, he is liable for, and now we're in 34, each and every oath if the plaintiff administered several oaths to him and he denied having the deposit in his possession, whether he took the oath before a court or not before a court. Despite the broad application of the halakha, the verse is speaking of liability only in cases involving a monetary claim. Then in the case of an oath of testimony with regard to which the Torah did not render the halakhic status of women like that of men, the status of relatives like that of non-relatives, and the status of unfit witnesses like those fit to testify, and he is liable to bring only one sliding scale offering if the plaintiff administered several oaths to him and he falsely denied knowledge of the matter in the presence of a court. It is not right that the verse is speaking of liability only in cases involving a monetary claim. And the Baraita rejects this inference. What is notable about the case of a deposit? It is notable in that, with regard to a deposit, the Torah did not render the halakhic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others like that of one who himself took an oath, as one to whom an oath was administered by others is exempt. And the Torah did not render the halakhic status of one who takes an intentional false oath like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. And you will say that the same is true with regard to an oath of testimony, as in that case the Torah rendered the halakhic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others like that of one who himself took an oath. And it rendered the halakhic status of one who takes an intentional false oath like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath, unwitting false oath, and one is liable to bring an offering in both instances. Therefore, the verse states the term shall sin with regard to an oath of testimony and states shall sin with regard to an oath on a deposit in order to derive a verbal analogy. Here, it is stated with regard to an oath of testimony shall sin, so Leviticus 5:1, and there it is stated with regard to an oath on a deposit shall sin, Leviticus 5:21. Just as there, concerning an oath on a deposit, the verse is speaking only with regard to a monetary claim, so to here, concerning an oath of testimony, the verse is speaking only with regard to a monetary claim. After presenting the different proofs cited in the Baraita, the Gemara proceeds to analyze the opinions cited therein, beginning with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that one is liable for an oath of testimony only if it involves a monetary claim from the case of an oath on a deposit based on multiple instances of the term or that appear in both contexts. And there is an oath with those multiple instances of the term or, and there is no priest in their context. So Rabbi Bar Ula objects to this. The multiple instances of the term or in the verse, or, this is a quote, or if anyone shall take an oath to clearly express with his lips to do evil or to do good, Leviticus 5:4, which is written with regard to an oath on an utterance, will prove that one is liable even without a monetary claim, as there are multiple instances of the term or, and there is an oath in their context, and there is no priest in their context, and they are not speaking with regard to a monetary claim. The Gemara rejects this. It stands to reason that he should have derived the halacha with regard to an oath of testimony from an oath on a deposit, and not from an oath on an utterance, due to the verbal analogy between the terms shall sin and shall sin. So the Gemara rejects this. On the contrary, he should have derived the halacha with regard to an oath of testimony from the halacha with regard to an oath on an utterance, as it is a derivation of one case for which one is liable to bring a sin offering for taking a false oath from another case for which one is liable to bring a sin offering for taking a false oath. This is in contrast to an oath on a deposit for which one is liable to bring a guilt offering for taking a false oath. Rather, it stands to reason that he should have derived the halacha with regard to an oath of testimony from the halacha with regard to an oath on a deposit, as there are many elements common to both oaths, represented by the mnemonic: sin, intentionally claimed from him, denied his claim, and his past. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 terms there. There is a verbal analogy between them, as the term shall sin appears in both contexts. In both cases, one is liable for taking a false oath intentionally. Additionally, in both cases, there is a claim presented by one of the parties in denial of that claim by the one taking the oath. And both oaths relate to events that transpired in the past. The Gemara asks, on the contrary, he should have derived the halacha with regard to an oath of testimony from the halacha with regard to an oath on an utterance, as there are many elements common to both oaths, represented by the mnemonic sin offering that descended to 1/5. In both cases, one is liable to bring a sin offering for a false oath, as opposed to a guilt offering for a false oath on a deposit. In each case, the offering is a sliding scale offering, as opposed to the fixed offering in the case of an oath on a deposit. In both cases, there is no payment of an additional 1/5 for taking a false oath. In the case of a false oath on a deposit, there is payment of an additional 1/5. The Gemara answers, these elements common to an oath of testimony and an oath on a deposit are more numerous than the elements common to an oath of testimony and an oath on an utterance. Rabbi Akiva says that it is written with regard to an oath of testimony, quote, it shall be when he will be guilty of one of these, Leviticus 5:5. The term of these is a restrictive expression from which it is derived. There are some of these for which he is liable, and there are some of these for which he is exempt. How so? If the plaintiff demanded testimony from the witness with regard to a monetary claim, the witness is liable for taking a false oath. If the plaintiff demanded testimony from the witness with regard to another matter, he is exempt. So the Gemara challenges, since it is not clear from the verse for which one claim, since it is not clear from the verse for which claim one is liable and for which claim one is exempt, I will reverse it and say that one is liable only when the claim was with regard to another matter, not when it involves monetary matters. So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Akiva relies on the multiple instances of the term or, as cited by Rabbi Eliezer, to derive from an oath on a deposit that one is liable for a false oath that involves a monetary claim. From the term of these, Rabbi Akiva derives that there are some cases involving monetary claims for which one is not liable for taking a false oath of testimony. So the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between the opinions of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva? With regard to which cases involve monetary claims, does Rabbi Akiva hold that one is not liable for taking a false oath of testimony? The Gemara answers, the practical difference between their opinions is in the case of one who administers an oath to witnesses with regard to testimony involving land. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, they are liable if they take a false oath. According to Rabbi Akiva, they are exempt in that case, as it is excluded by the term of these. The Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says there with regard to an oath on a deposit and an oath of testimony, that in the case of one who administers an oath to witnesses with regard to testimony involving land, the witnesses are exempt, even according to Rabbi Eliezer. What difference is there between the opinions of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva? The Gemara answers, the practical difference between their opinions is in the case where one administers an oath to witnesses with regard to testimony involving a fine. According to Rabbi Eliezer, they are liable, and according to Rabbi Akiva, they are exempt. So Rabbi Yoshi Haglili cites a different proof and says, the verse states with regard to an oath of testimony, and he is a witness, or he saw, or he knew, Leviticus 5:1, it is with regard to testimony that is founded on sight without knowledge of the matter, or by means of knowledge without sight, in the verses that the verse is speaking. The reference is to testimony involving monetary matters, as all other testimony requires both knowledge and sight. So Rav Papa said to Abaye, shall we say that Rabbi Yoshi Haglili does not accept the opinion of Rabbi Acha, as it is taught in a Braita, in the Tosefta, and it is also Bava Kama 3.6, the Rabbi Acha says, if there is a rutting male camel, so Gamal Ha-Ocher, that is rampaging among other camels, and then a camel was found killed at its side, it is evident that this rampaging camel killed it, and the owner must pay for the damage. Rabbi Acha rules that cases monetary law can be decided based on circumstantial evidence, as if he is of the opinion that the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Acha, that witnesses may testify on the basis of circumstantial evidence. In cases of capital law, too, you find a case of knowledge without sight, as in the case discussed by Rabbi Shimon ben Shittach. As it is taught in Braita, that Rabbi Shimon ben Shittach said in the form of an oath, I will not see the consolation of Israel if I did not see one who was running after another into a ruin, and I ran after him and found a sword in his hand and blood dripping from the sword and the slain person convulsing. I said to him, wicked one, who killed this person? It was either me or you, and there is no one else here. But what can I do, as your blood is not given to my control, and I have no jurisdiction to execute you, as the Torah says, on the basis of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is to die be put to death, Deuteronomy 17, verse 6. And there are no witnesses here. Rather, the omnipresent will exact retribution from you. The sages said, they did not move from there until a snake came and bit the pursuer, and he died. Rabbi Acha would hold in that case that the pursuer would be executed by a court based on circumstantial evidence. Ostensibly, Rabbi Yoshi Haglili disagrees, as he says that testimony based on knowledge without sight exists only in cases of monetary law. The Gemara answers, even if you say that Rabbi Yoshi Haglili is of the opinion that the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Acha, that one may rely on circumstantial evidence even in cases of capital law, one may nevertheless distinguish between cases of monetary law and cases of capital law. Granted, even in cases of capital law, you find testimony based on knowledge without sight. But how can you find a case of sight without knowledge? Don't the witnesses need to know if the one whom you witnessed killing another killed a Gentile, or he killed a Jew, or if he killed one who has a wound that would have caused him to die within 12 months, treifa, or he killed one whose body is intact? The Gemara notes conclude from it that Rabbi Yoshi Haglili holds that in a case where one administers an oath to witnesses with regard to testimony involving a fine, the witnesses are exempt from liability for taking a false oath of testimony. As if it enters your mind to say that the witnesses are liable, although you find testimony with regard to fines based on knowledge without sight. And witnesses may testify based on circumstantial evidence in cases of sight without knowledge. When it comes to fines, don't the witnesses need to know if the rapist engaged in intercourse with a Gentile woman, or if he engaged in intercourse with a Jewish woman, if he engaged in intercourse with a virgin, or he engaged in intercourse with a non-virgin? And Rabbi Yoshi Haglili holds that witnesses are liable for taking a false oath of testimony only in cases where both testimony based on sight alone and testimony based on knowledge alone are accepted, which is not the case concerning testimony involving fines. Apropos the matter of sight, without knowledge, in cases of monetary law, the Gemara relates, Rav Hamnuna was sitting before Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda was sitting as he was raising a dilemma. If one demands payment from another and claims, I counted for you and gave you 100 dinars in the presence of so-and-so and another so-and-so, and witnesses see him counting the money from outside, what is the halacha? Is their testimony accepted? So Rav Hamnuna said to Rav Yehuda, and what does the other person claim in response to the demand for repayment? If he says these matters never happened, he assumes the presumptive status of a denier of the truth, as the witnesses testified that they saw the claimant counting the money and giving it to him. If he says, yes, I took the money from him, but it is my money that I took, then when the witnesses come and testify that they saw the claimant counting money and giving it to him, what of it? The testimony of the witnesses does not contradict his claim, as the witnesses do not know the circumstances under which the money changed hands. Rav Yehuda said to him, Are you Hamnuna? Enter and come into the study hall as you make your teacher wiser. So the Gemara relates a similar incident. There was a certain individual who said to another, I counted for you and gave you 100 dinars as a loan alongside this column. The other person said to him in response, I did not pass alongside this column. The 2 witnesses came and testified about him that they saw that he urinated alongside this column. Reish Lakish said he assumes the presumptive status of a denier of the truth, as the testimony of witnesses proves that he passed along the column. Rav Nachman objects to this. That is a ruling characteristic of a Persian court, not a reasonable ruling characteristic of a Jewish court. Did the respondent say that he never passed alongside the column? It was that he did not pass alongside the column in the context of this matter that he said to him that he did not pass the column. Therefore, the testimony of the witnesses does not contradict his statement. There are those who say that the incident transpired a bit differently. There was a certain individual who said to another, I counted for you and gave you 100 dinars as a loan alongside this column. The other person said to him in response, I never passed alongside this column. Witnesses emerged and testified concerning him that he urinated alongside this column. So Rav Nachman said he assumes the presumptive status of a denier of the truth as the witnesses contradicted his claim. Rava said to Rav Nachman, there is no proof from here that he assumes the presumptive status of a denier, as any matter that is not incumbent upon a person to remember, he performs it and it is not on his mind. Therefore, when he denied ever passing alongside the column, it was because there was never any reason for him to remember that he had been there. The Gemara proceeds to cite the opinion cited last in the Braita explaining the source of halacha that one is liable for taking a false oath of testimony only for a case involving monetary matters. Rabbi Shimon says the Torah rendered one liable the Torah rendered one liable if he takes a false oath here with regard to an oath of testimony, and the Torah rendered one liable if he takes a false oath with regard to an oath on a deposit, just as there the verse is speaking of liability only in cases involving monetary claims. So to here, the verse is speaking of liability only in cases involving monetary claims. They mock this proof in the West, which is Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara asks, what is worthy of mockery in the statement of Rabbi Shimon? The Gemara explains that they mocked that which the Braita teaches in the continuation, rejecting the a fortiori inference suggested by Rabbi Shimon. What is notable about the case of a deposit? It is notable in that, with regard to a deposit, the Torah did not render the halakhic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others like that of one who himself took an oath, as one to whom an oath was administered by others is exempt, and the Torah did not render the halakhic status of one who takes an intentional false oath like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. This rejection is difficult. Now, with regard to the fact that one who administered an oath to himself is liable in the case of an oath on testimony, from where is it derived according to Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon derives it by means of a verbal analogy from an oath on a deposit. If so, based on the same verbal analogy, in the case of an oath on a deposit too, let us derive from the case of an oath of testimony the fact that one is liable for a false oath that was administered by others. The Gemara rejects this, and what is worthy of mockery is in that statement. Perhaps Rabbi Shimon does not derive that one who takes a false oath of testimony on his own is liable by means of a verbal analogy from an oath on a deposit. Rather, he derives it by means of an a fortiori inference. If one is liable for a false oath of testimony administered by others, is it not all the more so that he is liable for an oath that he takes on his own? The Gemara answers, rather, the mockery is with regard to the distinction between an oath on a deposit and an oath of testimony in the matter of whether the halakhic status of one who takes an intentional false oath is like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath, as it teaches in the Braita. What is notable about the case of a deposit? It is notable in that, with regard to a deposit, the Torah did not render the halakhic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others like that of one who himself took an oath. As one to whom an oath was administered by others is exempt, and the Torah the Torah did not render the halakhic status of one who takes an intentional false oath like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. Now, from where does he derive that one who takes an intentional false oath of testimony is liable? He derives it as it is not written in the context of an oath of testimony, and it is hidden. Here, too, it is not written in the context of an oath on a deposit, and it is hidden. Therefore, there should be no distinction between intentional and unwitting with regard to an oath on a deposit either. Rav Huna says to the sages, and what is worthy of mockery in that statement? Perhaps the fact that the halakhic status of one who takes an intentional false oath is not like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath in the case of a deposit. And it is from the halachot of misuse of consecrated property that Rabbi Shimon derived it. Just as one is liable to bring a guilt offering for the misuse of consecrated property only if he did so unwittingly, one is liable to bring a guilt offering for a false oath on a deposit only if he unwittingly took the false oath. The Gemara answers, and that is what is worthy of mockery. Instead of deriving the lack of liability for an intentional false oath of deposit from the case of misuse of consecrated property, let him derive liability for an intentional false oath on a deposit from the case of an oath of testimony. So the Gemara rejects this. It stands to reason that he should have derived it from the case of misuse of consecrated property, as that is a derivation of misuse written with regard to an oath on a deposit. If anyone shall sin and commits an act of misuse and dealt falsely with his colleague in a matter of deposit, Leviticus 5:21, which is derived from misuse written with regard to misuse of consecrated property. Quote, if anyone commits an act of misuse and sinned unwittingly from items consecrated to the Lord, Leviticus 5:15. The Gemara asks, on the contrary, he should have derived it from the case of an oath of testimony, as that is a derivation of, quote, shall sin, written with regard to an oath on a deposit, which is derived from shall sin, written with regard to an oath of testimony. Quote, and if anyone shall sin and he bears the voice of an oath, he is a witness, Leviticus 5:1. The Gemara rejects this. It stands to reason that it is from the case of misuse of consecrated property that he should have derived it, as there are many elements common to an oath on a deposit and misuse of consecrated property represented by the mnemonic misuse with regard to all, derived benefit, with fixed, 1/5, and guilt offering. The term misuse is employed in both cases. Both cases are relevant with regard to all individuals and not only those fit to testify. Both involve one deriving benefit from property that is not his. In both cases, one is liable to bring a fixed guilt offering, as opposed to one who takes a false oath of testimony, who is liable to bring a sliding scale offering. In both cases, one adds 1/5 to the payment of the principal. In both cases, that is the offering with which one gains atonement. The Gemara rejects this. On the contrary, he should have derived the halacha with regard to an oath on a deposit from the halacha of an oath of testimony, as there are many elements common to both oaths represented by the mnemonic sin, ordinary, with an oath, claimed from him, denied his claim, and multiple instances of the term or. The term shall sin is written in both contexts. Both oaths relate to the property of ordinary individuals, not consecrated property. In both cases, there is a claim presented by one of the parties and denial of that claim by the one taking the oath. Multiple instances of the term or appear in both passages in the Torah. The Gemara responds, these elements common to an oath on a deposit and misuse of consecrated property are more numerous than the elements common to an oath on a deposit and an oath of testimony. Rather, after resolving all the difficulties that were raised against the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, the question remains, what did the sages of Eretz Yisrael find that is worthy of mockery in that Baraita? So when Rav Papa and Rav Huna, son of Rav Yehoshua, came from the study hall of their teacher, they said, this is what is worthy of mockery. Now, since ultimately Rabbi Shimon derives the halacha by means of a verbal analogy between the term shall sin, written with regard to an oath on a deposit, and the term shall sin, written with regard to an oath of testimony, why is it that he refutes the parallel between them by saying what is notable about the case of a deposit? It is notable in that with regard to a deposit, the Torah did not render the halakhic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others like that of one who himself took an oath, as one to whom an oath was administered by others is exempt, and the Torah did not render the halakhic status of one who takes an intentional false oath like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. So Rabbi Shimon should have derived by means of a verbal analogy that all the halachot of an oath of testimony and all the halachot of an oath on a deposit are identical. The Gemara rejects this. And what is worthy of mockery in that statement? Perhaps when Rabbi Shimon refuted the parallel between the two oaths, it was prior to the verbal analogy being established for him, and the derivation was by means of a paradigm. After the verbal analogy was established for him, he does not refute the parallel and holds that in the case of an oath on a deposit, one is liable to bring a guilt offering for false oaths administered by others, as well as for intentional false oaths. The Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Shimon not refute the parallel between the two oaths? But didn't Rava bar Itai say to the sages, who is the Tana who taught with regard to an oath on a deposit that atonement by means of an offering is not possible for one who takes an intentional false oath? It is Rabbi Shimon. Apparently, Rabbi Shimon concludes that there remains a distinction between intentional and unwitting in the case of an oath on a deposit. The Gemara suggests, perhaps with regard to the halakhic status of one who takes an intentional false oath being like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath, Rabbi Shimon refutes the parallel between the two oaths, even after the verbal analogy is established for him, as he derives the halacha of an oath on a deposit from the halacha of misuse of consecrated property, as those elements common to an oath on a deposit and the misuse of consecrated property are more numerous than the elements common to an oath on a deposit and an oath of testimony. But he does not refute the parallel between the two oaths, with the claim that there is a distinction between them with regard to whether the halakhic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others is like that of one who himself took an oath. Once the verbal analogy was established for him, there is no longer a distinction between the two oaths in that regard. The Gemara asked, if according to Rabbi Shimon, based on the derivation from the misuse of consecrated property, one who intentionally takes a false oath on a deposit does not bring a guilt offering like one who took the false oath unwittingly, let the discussion of the case of an oath of testimony return to the verbal analogy and drive it from the case of an oath on a deposit, that the halakhic status of one who takes an intentional false oath is not like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. Just as in the case of an oath on a deposit, one who takes an unwitting false oath, yes, he is liable to bring a guilt offering, and one who takes an intentional false oath, no, he is not liable. So too, in the case of an oath of testimony, one who takes an unwitting false oath, yes, he is liable to bring a sin offering, and one who takes an intentional false oath, no, he is not liable. Just as he derives the case of a oath on a deposit from the case of misuse of consecrated property. And that's it for Daf 34. Shabbat Shalom.